So this was found in Black Anarchism, a reader. And so this is The Principles of Anarchism by Lucy E. Parsons. I'm just going to read a little bit of it. And if you hear noises in the background, that is my cat. Okay? So, when I came to realize the faults, failings, shortcomings, aspirations, and ambitions of fallible man, I concluded that it would not be the safest nor best for society as a whole to entrust the management of all its affairs with their manifold deviations and ramifications in the hands of finite man, to be managed by the party which happened to come into power, and therefore was the majority party, nor did it tend, nor does it now make one particle of difference to me what a party out of power may promise. It does not tend to allay my fears of a party, when entrenched and securely seated in power, might do to crush opposition and silence the voice of the minority, and thus retard the downward step of progress. My mind is appalled at the thought of a political party having control of all the details that go to make up the sum total of our lives. Think of it for an instant, that the party in power shall have all authority to dictate the kind of books that shall be used in our schools and universities, government officials editing, printing, and circulating our literature, histories, magazines, and press, to say nothing of the 1,001 activities of life that a people engage in a civilized society. To my mind, the struggle for liberty is too great, and the few steps that we have gained have been won at too great a sacrifice for the great mass of people for this 20th century to consent to turn over to any political party the management of our social and industrial affairs. Now I'm going to another chapter that I enjoyed. What we anarchists contend for is a larger opportunity to develop the units in society, that mankind may possess the right as a sound being to develop that which is broadest, noblest, highest, and best, unhandicapped by any centralized authority, where he shall have to wait for his permits to be signed, sealed, and approved, and handed down to him before he can engage in the active pursuits of life with his fellow being. We know that after all, as we grow more enlightened under this larger liberty, we will grow to care less and less about that exact distribution of material wealth, which in our greed-nurtured senses seems now so impossible to think upon carelessly. She's referencing the society that we grew up in. Since we grew up in greed, everybody's gonna be unhappy. Oh no, we cannot be equals. No, that's just what your society taught you to think, that you're scary of everyone and da-da-da. But it's not. The man and woman of loftier intellects in the present think not so much of the riches to be gained by their efforts as of the good they can do for their fellow creatures. There is an innate spring of healthy action in every human being who has not been crushed and pinched by poverty and drudgery from before his birth, that impels him onward and upward. He cannot be idle. If he would, it is as natural for him to develop, expand, and use the powers within him when no repressed, as it is for the rose to bloom in the sunlight and fling its fragrance on the passing breeze. Basically, humanity isn't bad, and most of us, if we are given free time, we're going to do something amazing. And if we're given time to actually be and enjoy life, we're going to think, okay, how can I help others around me? Because that makes me happy too. And loftier intellects, I reference this to our ancient wisdom, the wisdom of our ancestors, what our ancestors been doing for 6 million years, what our ancestors been doing for 200,000 years, right? The majority of our human history, the 95% of our human history. The greatest works of the past were never performed for the sake of money. Who can measure the worth of a Shakespeare, an Angelo, or Beethoven in dollars and cents? Agassiz said he had no time to make money. There were higher and better objects in life than that. And so it will be when humanity is once relieved from the pressing fear of starvation, want, and slavery. It will be concerned less and less about the ownership of vast accumulations of wealth. Guys, You will stop even thinking about, oh, how am I going to get more? Such possessions would be but an annoyance and trouble when 2 or 3 or 4 hours of a day, easy and healthful labor, will produce all the comfort and luxuries one can use, and the opportunity to labor is never denied. People will become indifferent as to who owns the wealth they do not need. Wealth will be below par, and it will be found that men and women will not accept it for pay or be bribed to do what they would not willingly and naturally do without it. Some higher incentive must and will supersede the greed for gold, the involuntary aspiration born in man to make the most of oneself. Guys, make the most of oneself. And this is the other thing. People have been living this way the majority of history. I don't care. Our human history of 6 million years, the history of 200,000 years of our Homo sapien. Anyway, the involuntary aspiration born in man to make the most of oneself, to be loved and appreciated by one's fellow beings, to make the world better for having lived in it, will urge him on to nobler deeds than ever the sordid and selfish incentive of material gain has done. Which is true. Like, even with children want to be like their parents. They want to be like making their friends happy. They want to fit in. They want to do what is seen as good and helpful to others. And when they see a smile on people's faces by them being around, they want to do more good and go towards that feeling. Like, you don't have to hammer and punish people to do good. We do it naturally on our own. And if you just cannot grasp it, sorry that's in your head. You need to unlearn that fast. If in the present chaotic and shameful struggle for existence, when organized society offers a premium on greed, cruelty, and deceit, men can be found who stand aloof and almost alone in their determination to work for good rather than gold, who suffer want and persecution rather than desert principle, who can bravely walk to the scaffold for the good they can do humanity. What may we expect from men when freed from the grinding necessity of selling the better part of themselves for bread? The terrible conditions under which labor is performed, the awful alternative if one does not prostitute talent and morals in the service of mammon, and the power acquired with the wealth obtained by ever so unjust means, combine to make the conception of free and voluntary labor almost an impossible one. And yet there are examples of this principle right now, even now. In a well-bred family, each person has certain duties, and yes, you've seen the families, which are performed cheerfully and are not measured out and paid for according to some predetermined standard. When the united members sit down to the well-filled table, the stronger do not scramble to get to the most, while the weakest do without, or gather greedily around them more food than they can possibly consume. No, in like a well-to-do family, they don't be scrambling and fighting and arguing about, oh, you gotta get this food, you gotta get this one, oh no, we ain't got nothing, oh da-da-da. Each one will patiently and politely wait his turn to be served and leaves what he does not want. He is certain that when again hungry, plenty of food will be provided. This principle can be extended to include all of society when people are civilized enough to wish it. And so with that, that's how our society has been. We never just hoard things for no reason. We get what we want, we're good, and then we dip. And this whole, you have to have excess, you have to keep holding on because there will be a future where you will need it. No, like, everything is good in the now. That's how we lived. We lived off the land for many of years with the concept that the earth will always provide for us. And if it didn't do that, then we adapt and then we walk to another piece of land and we learn how to make it work there. Like, people would be migratory. They didn't own anything. They usually had a group of like 15 other people with them, maybe one sometimes, but either way, they knew how to do alone. And then they also knew how to work well in a group. Sometimes they would gather in groups of 200 people, but that was only when, like, you know, times were really rough. And it was like, oh, everyone needs water and this is the only water source. But overall, it wasn't too bad. It wasn't too harsh. There were no kings and queens. And people, yeah, they just knew how to live with their environment just like any animals would do. If there were dry seasons, people knew that, okay, this is a season where things are not growing right now. I understand it. It's going to pass. It wasn't this big, oh, this is heavy on my heart. Even when someone like passed away, it wasn't a big deal because people knew they're connected to nature and they're connected to the earth, and they know it's gonna be okay. And I don't know how to describe that, but it was a better time. And I didn't live there. I don't live there. All I know is I know that it is better because even though I haven't lived there, I've seen evidence of it working, you know? So yeah, that's it. And this was by Lucy Parsons. It was made sometime 1905 and 1910, sometimes in that area. Thank you guys. And it was from the Black Rose Anarchist Federation, and I was reading it off of the anarchistlibrary.org. Great website. So bye guys.